Hello and welcome to today's webinar featuring Kevin Pelphrey, John Gabrieli and Ron Suskind. I'm Claire Cameron, Engagement Editor at Spectrum, the home for autism research news and analysis. We'll begin today's discussion in a moment, but first, know that we'll be fielding questions at the end of today's presentation. You can ask them at any point during the session. To ask a question, submit them via the chat box on your screen. And as always, I'll note that if there are any members of the press tuning in, you can only report information presented during this webinar if that material has already been published elsewhere, or if you have first obtained express written permission from the presenter. Today's debate digs into the idea of affinities in autism research and therapy, a term given to the special, deep interest many people with autism have. We're broadcasting live from Cambridge, Massachusetts today. Our panelists today are Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Ron Suskind, who is the author of Life Animated, which was recently made into an Academy Award-winning nominated documentary of the same name. Ron is the co-founder of Sidekicks, an app that is designed to harness a child with autism's affinity for an animated character of their choosing in order to help boost their communication skills. Our second panelist is Kevin Pelphrey, who is the Carbonell Family Professor and Director of the Autism and Neurodevelopmental Disorders Institute at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Our panel is rounded out by John Gabrieli, who is the Grover Herman Professor of Health and Sciences and Technology and Professor of Brain and Cognitive Sciences at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Gabrieli is also an investigator at the McGovern Institute for Brain Research at MIT. Welcome all. Perhaps we can begin by sharing each of your perspectives coming into this discussion, and Ron, perhaps you want to lead the way.
So we arrived here over 20 years, really 20 years that have been a time of great change in ASD, in autism, understanding it and figuring out what to do with it, harness it, deal with it, treat it. And the short version of this tale, which you can see in the book and the documentary film, is that our son lost speech, late onset autism guy, regressive autism. At 3, he loses speech. We find out over time that he's scripting. He is repeating lines from movies. He all he wants to do is watch the Disney animated movies. It's every minute he gets. And we start to wonder if the lines we're deciphering, because it's hard to understand them, drawn from scenes are ones that he's using in a way, other than simply repetition or repeating a sound. And so over many years of search and find, we discover, in fact, he is. And what we first see as echolalic with a small e, as opposed to other understandings of echolalia that have grown in the last 15 years, we realize at some point when he says something quite interpretive, making sense of a Disney movie, that he's processing this dialogue and the lyrics to make sense of not just himself, but our wider world. At which point, though he has little speech, around 7, we begin to communicate with him in Disney dialogue, which means we have to literally spend years in the basement watching the 50 Disney animated movies since Snow White, the first one in 1937. My wife and I are well-educated people. I've got a graduate degree. We didn't get PhDs in Disney, but we did. And we basically started to fit a matrix together of what scene in what Disney movie fits with what he is going through now. And then we would play the scenes together. Sometimes, though, it was not that product-oriented or task-based. So much of it was simply just enjoying the movies with him. Something Cornelia said, my wife, which was telling, she said at one point, we can't be fixing him every day of his life. That's no relationship with a parent and a child. We need to just enjoy this thing of his, because a way we will love him is through what he loves. That's what happened. And once we stop turning it into mostly tools in behavior therapy, like if you need to watch, if you do all these things at school, you get to watch Beauty and the Beast tonight, and each of those things was like walking across hot coals for him in a sensory overload. Instead, we just said, we're just going to love the movies with him. And that's when the world started to open. He started to let us in deeper. And that's where we saw interpretive speech, we saw symbolic thinking, we saw all sorts of interesting pattern recognition in his underground cavern. We lived there with him. We played scenes, we became characters, and we emerge over his teenage years as he gets speech back little by little. Different than when he was 2, but speech where he really could communicate. We emerge with him together. So we end up, first called this Disney therapy, but there were copyright issues. So eventually, though, we call it affinity therapy, simply because we started to bump into kids who were doing exactly the same thing with whatever their affinity was. Harry Potter, Star Wars, Thomas the Tank, medieval poetry, astrophysics. It was amazing. And the key thing is this, is they were drawing from their affinity what they needed to make their way in the world. It was often extremely interpretive. Not what we would think of at a first step as a neurotypical, but more and more we said, wait a second, that's a match for what we're doing. But in this context-aware and domain-limited realm in which they are spending such an extraordinary amount of energy. And so after the book came out, we all started to hang out a little bit together because John and Kevin both have enormous acuity here coming into this equation. But also through our story, the book, I spoke at NIH and the UN and Congress, we started to think about, as John said, the telescope of the affinity is a place in which you not only tap intrinsic motivation, but see underlying capacities that might not be otherwise visible. That's something that a light went off. And then Kevin had, I think, one of the best lines. He says they use these affinities like the Enigma machine, a code breaker, to crack the codes of themselves and their place in the world. And that code breaker idea now I've seen it 1,000 times. We built this beneficial app corporation to build an app and to send it to people so they can do this themselves, called Sidekicks. We have folks that have come to us from every walk of life, and they do just that very thing. So this is very hopeful in a way to harness the so-called restricted interest, been around since Leo Kanner, called the circumscribed interest, mostly seen as obsession, perseverity, wheel in the ditch. Either cut it off, control it, certainly don't feed it, use it as an aversive or reward in a behavioral therapy, but not more than that. We've been part, I think, of widening and maybe reversing some of that thinking to say, wait, these affinities are not prisons, they're pathways, if you know how to use them. And so that's a big part of what these guys are so good at thinking about.
Kevin, John, either you like to?
Yeah, so I really enjoy hearing that explanation. And I remember reading your book and just being struck by thinking about my own experience as a father and as a neuroscientist. I think I've got a couple of slides that I wanted to show in that context. I think one of the things that I struggle with as a dad, coming up on the screen now, people will see my daughter Frances. And this is more than just a dad taking an opportunity to show pictures of his beautiful daughter.
She's beautiful.
But this is Frances, and first 4 years of her life, and she was delayed in a lot of milestones early in life, and did not speak until quite late, almost 3.5. And the first word she said was really almost a whole sentence, and it just kind of popped out, and it was Henry, my Henry, that's my Henry. And to kind of back up on that story a little bit, you see on the screen 2 of her affinities. One was her dog, which was my first child, Jeremy, the English setter up there that she's posing with. And they spent pretty much every day together until Jeremy passed away pretty recently. But her kind of second affinity was the Wiggles, which I would watch with her every day that I was home from work. And she loved the show. It was kind of a just a fun musical show, people jumping around, a bunch of guys singing. I think they had a punk band at one point, and then they became a kids band. And then there were these characters that were these kind of big plush characters. And Henry is the octopus that's standing next to her there. We actually sought out a small place in New England that had the Wiggles on as a stage show. And that was her first visit to see the Wiggles at the stage show. And she brought along all of her plush dolls to that. But her first sentence, which was also her first word, was "My Henry." And the way that came about was that we were watching the Wiggles together, and I had open my computer working, and she's kind of sitting in my lap. And I happened to go on eBay just looking for a plush doll of Henry, or any of them. And the show was already kind of out of circulation. So on eBay, they were going for a premium, and I kind of looked and went, oh yeah, no, but she's solid. So she was like, that, and kind of making noises, and like, well, okay, I'll get it. And so I'm not gonna admit how much Henry cost, but it got me in quite a bit of trouble with her mom. But Henry arrived, and this giant box with this very small doll, and we pulled Henry out, and I've never seen her more excited than at that moment. And she grabbed Henry, and her mom was kind of teasing her and said, that's my Henry, and motioned to take Henry, sorry. And Frances screams, no, my Henry, mine, and starts running around the room, and we kind of looked at each other like, she's talking. And then kind of language came more and more thereafter, and now we're very fortunate. She's more or less caught up verbally to where she should be at the age of 13, roughly. Kind of the pragmatics of language are very different for her, and the social use of it. But she writes extraordinarily well, and what her affinities have of course, they've sort of taken from Wiggles to various various Disney characters through originally kind of the cartoon characters of Disney, and then into the more human adolescent characters that she kind of developed with. And what I saw her use all of those characters for was to navigate what she was experiencing in school. And she would spend an extraordinary amount of time when she came home from school acting out the day's events to, like even exactly what the teacher said, lining up her dolls and teaching them as the teacher, and having the dolls interact with each other and kind of talk like people were talking to her. So we could know exactly what happened during her day just by sitting with her. And she has an extraordinary memory. And so she would do that. And at first, there was this constant, there was this constant push-pull between myself and the community of doctors and therapists that we had working with us about, well, do you use this as a reinforcement, or do you use this for something more than that? And is there anything more to this than just, it's an obsession, and so we've got to kind of stop it because it's interfering with actual social learning. And I thought, well, from my perspective, anything that you use as an external aid, and if you're developmentally behind other groups, you're going to be using external aids longer. It's what developmentalists like Vygotsky would talk about as externalization, and it's a normal developmental course. And I'm seeing her do this longer, and it looks strange because she's too old to be doing this, but it's still something that's normal. And she's using it in an exaggerated way because she's not able to take advantage of the other kind of social fabric out there. And then that was my point of view on this. And I'm still, I think I'm right about this. But it suggests kind of two things from the neuroscience point of view. One is that for Frances, certainly things that are her affinities should make systems of the brain that are responsible for processing reward kind of really strongly activate and come online. But they should also bring online systems that are involved in symbolic thinking and logic and making associations, and you should see the rich interconnection of those two. And that's what happens anytime we become expert in something, I think, and John's the expert on this. So I'm kind of talking out of my depth here, but that's the prediction that scientists would make if there's more to it than an obsession. If it's simply an obsession, like I collect stuff, certain tools, but I don't, I actually don't use those tools because they're my collecting tools. And so I don't want to get them scratched up. But that's just an obsession. I don't interpret the world through those tools.
Yeah, right.
So.
Yeah, so it's really amazing for me every time to hear Ron's story or Kevin's story. And I know Kevin for a long time as an outstanding scientist in the field of neuroscience of human autism. And then I was struck, like many, when Ron shared his story through his book and through his very powerful movie as well, about how his son opened up his communication channels, as Ron just described very nicely. So Ron and I talked with another, I from the viewpoint of cognitive neuroscience, brain imaging, and trying to understand which parts of the brain do what part of the mind, and how that varies and go with autism. An audience familiar with autism will know there's a neurologist who once told me this phrase that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And although I think human individuality is remarkably complex, this is why even in the age of the human genome can barely account for any, with the rarest of exceptions, practically no human ability or characteristic is simply accounted for. The variance, the difference, the individuality of people with autism is just stunning. And it's been actually a huge research challenge in our field in terms of understanding what's going on. That's because I think we're trying to have one story for a million stories. But so as we thought about that, and as I heard Ron describing how his son opened up and shared through his affinities, we got really interested in what might be the brain mechanism, as Kevin has alluded to, that would support that kind of response and reward. And as Kevin said nicely, some kinds of things we are really interested in, like if we're obsessed by collecting newspapers, the hoarders, and that's often out of fear. But we don't have every issue of the New York Times for the last 10 years, it will be an incomplete set. And reward is the opposite, it's a sort of joyous anticipation. And we have a tremendous amount of research that has identified in animals and in humans the same brain systems that respond to reward. And in animals, it's often studied with food. In humans, it's often studied with monetary rewards because it's the easy thing to tell people. If you see a plus, you'll get $1, and everybody gets excited about that possibility. But it turns out the reward system responds to everything you're interested in. If you're interested in minivans and sports cars, it turns out really it's a common language for things in the world that are joyously anticipated, and a very strong learning mechanism as well, as Kevin alluded to. So. I got interested in the question of whether we could use our understanding of the human brain to see what goes on in somebody when they have an affinity for something. And some published studies looking at the reward system in autism, individuals with autism have said it's sort of under-responsive. Those studies usually have used the typical rewards of cash, which may not be the most enticing.
Oh, it is not motivated by cash.
Not at all. Only my cash.
That's right.
So knowing individuals with autism, it's not surprising that it's less rewarding than for a typically developing teenager who wants that. And so we're very interested in collaborating jointly on a project in which we understand whether when individuals with autism are afforded the chance to see something that truly they have an affinity for, and you heard some beautiful examples here, will that turn on or activate or capture the interest of the reward system? And that be the driver, as Kevin said beautifully, but not only the anticipation, but linking that to social cognition, how other people communicate, think, feel, and broaden the horizon of communication. So, we were very excited about understanding whether we could look at children one by one in terms of their affinities, whether we would discover a very active reward system, but it has to get the reward that the individual cares about. It has to be individually tailored, as the Disney movies. And I remember working with Ron and his son. His son came in.
Yeah.
I got to meet him. And,
Well, tell them that was an exciting day.
yeah,
a little over a year ago, yeah.
So Ron collected the videos that were his own favorites,
Right.
and some other video clips from the same movies, but that were not so captivating. So we knew he'd seen them all a lot, but some really were captured his interest and some did not. And we put him in the MRI scanner using functional MRI to ask what happens differently in Owen's brain when he sees a passage that's really motivating and rewarding versus not. And quite strikingly, the areas of the brain that are most associated with reward were turned on exactly during the periods on average when the rewarding videos were shown. So it's a really direct relationship in a single example. We have to do many more examples and strong scientific evidence about how it generalizes, but of how the right thing that a person cares about can really turn on the system, and that it is available in individuals who otherwise one might have thought is not easy to get their attention in terms of reward and joyous consequences.
Yeah, that's one of the great challenges you all as clinicians, therapists, researchers, of tapping intrinsic motivation in this population in an effective and productive way. That's always been the challenge, and a challenge that folks have, ABA and others, like, how do we, and that PRT obviously tries to solve some of those issues. How do you get the engagement, tapping the motivation, so they own essentially the progress, as opposed to what we often find where things don't generalize particularly well. It was so interesting, to see Owen in the fMRI and see these clips that we've watched, these like members of our family, these certain clips, and see him fire up. And also, we could all but see some of the things you found on the scan of the parts of the brain that were activating even beyond the reward circuitry. He really was bringing evaluation. He engages very cognitively in terms of all sorts of social insights and social decoding using the characters. And something that Temple Grandin said, because she's been involved and supportive of some of these things, is she said, what happens is when they watch a movie the first time, they often have a little trouble because it taps their predictive deficits. Paul and Sin is doing research on this at MIT. After the first viewing, though, they're past that. And on the second and the third and the 100th viewing, they become more and more settled, especially with the tonalities, Temple says. She says, they can hear it. You can't respond if you can't hear it. And you can't essentially become settled and aware. And it's not just overlearning, it's a kind of embrace of an extraordinary amount of things that we don't see, frankly, that they see. That now, once you get it through their eyes, you're like, wow, that's a lot to work with there in doing a big matching game between them and the world around the affinity. That's the key.
One of the things that I think might be particularly intriguing about movies, for us all, and this simply extends to autism, but the neuroscientist saying to someone who won a Pulitzer, when you create something that's a narrative, you're helping the reader or the viewer predict.
That's right.
And that's reward. When we as humans, the hypothesis is that's rewarding. When we predict what somebody's going to do successfully, and it happens, even if it's just the simplest things early in infancy, that's terribly rewarding, because now you've got this incredible motor that you can use and do all kinds of good stuff with. And so I think that one of the reasons why movies comes up a lot, especially Disney movies, really they hit you over the head with the narrative the plot line, and just in case you missed it,
Yeah.
this is the struggle between good and evil, and here it is. And really,
That's such an interesting point, Kevin, about, you should call it power at MIT, the issue of how narrative allows us to essentially predict. Once you get into these narrative tropes that become very common, you are strengthened in knowing kind of what's coming next, or not being surprised.
Right.
And how rewarding that especially would be for spectrum folks. I mean, narrative is so powerful, you don't even remember facts unless it's in the narrative structure.
Right.
Than a lot of neuroscientists say. Let me tell you something interesting, though, in terms of a twist that I found and was surprised by. Because, of course, I thought movies, it would be mostly and maybe all that. And there was another friend, the guy, another neuroscientist who has a kid, and we were having a conversation about, he says, look, my kid is not a Disney kid. I wish he was. He's a map kid. Okay, let's say his name's Ethan. I won't tell you the real kid's name. And his dad, Bart. So Bart's like, gosh, it was Disney. There's so much to work with, but my guy, Ethan, is maps. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Maps, maybe we're running into a neurotypical blind spot here. Maps are the two-dimensional rendering of all humanity, have been forever. It's not geography and topography, it's identity, it's your place in the world. Every town and every map has got a name, it's got narratives attached to it. You need Bart to learn to speak map.
Yeah.
So he spends a month speaking map with Ethan, and he calls me back, so we went out today, and he told me a moment where they spoke map, and Ethan was doing just what Owen does with Disney with a map, with a town on a map that had certain characteristics that seemed to reflect the dad. Now, that, I'm like, there it is. Now, but then I gave us, but I'm hearing this from lots of kids that are educating me. Like I gave a speech at UCLA at the Semel Institute, and a young lady comes up, and I'm saying, well, what's your thing? She's like, dinosaurs. I said, great. Okay, teach me something. I said, so what's your number one favorite? She's like, I don't want to tell you. Everyone laughs at me ever since Jurassic Park. I'm like, I promise I won't laugh. I said, she's like, okay. My favorite dinosaur is the velociraptor. I said, okay, that's a monstrous bloodthirsty animal. Okay, so why the velociraptor? And she gets the look, which you've seen your daughter know, where they're going into the underground well or the cavern. And she goes, well, okay, the velociraptors are pack animals. Now, all the animals in the pack are not the same, of course. And if they work together, they can take down a much larger dinosaur. So it's about interdependency. And seeing qualities in others that match with yours. And that's why I love the raptor. I'm like, there's not a paleontologist in the world that would come up with that. And it's just the thing we're talking about. She finds a way to draw from her affinity what she needs to make her way in the world. That's a very high level interpretive cognition that I find again and again and again through affinities, which is very hopeful.
Two things struck my mind. One was informal, which is that it's really striking for children who typically develop how much they enjoy repeated viewing of a movie.
Yes.
I mean, I think every parent is. My daughter this morning was playing Frozen. She was for 2 years, but for the 2 years before that, it seemed like this was like every week for a long time. So that joy of repetition is something that's something. When it's the right thing, when it's a powerful, huge stimulus experience, it's something that children enjoy, that repetition and mastery universally, it seems like. And the second thing, Ron, you touched on, that when this learning is intrinsic versus extrinsic, and there's a lot of psychology that shows beautifully, what you said very nicely, which is that if it's extrinsic, it tends to disappear the moment the characteristic is gone. It doesn't generalize, it doesn't get internalized. And when motivation is truly intrinsic, as it is for the right thing, whether it be a math or a movie, then it has a powerful capacity to engage other abilities a person has, and to be a tool in their mind in all situations, or a skill in their mind for all situations. So that tapping into the intrinsic curiosity, I think, is very, very powerful.
Yeah. The young lady had a great sense of well-being that I was speaking her language of dinosaur, just like Owen does, speaking his language of Disney, or your daughter. It's almost like they're recognizing me. They see who I am. This is my passion, it defines me. And they're often seeking others like them. That's the thing that we're trying to do here at Sidekicks is through the technology, which is dual device technology. So you get on and someone else is on their phone and you can connect with them. Is that we're gonna, in the fall, create a peer-to-peer one where kids who are up and running enough to do this, again, with oversight from parents, can connect to each other through their shared affinity, their shared language, because they're all yearning for that,
I was struck out in one of the newspaper articles that covered your book and beautiful lectures around. You mentioned my name, or my name was there, and I got several emails from people, or multiple emails from people, saying that this is just what my child. And I'm sure you've heard this much more often than I have. But the large number of people, the experience is that letting a child express his or her affinities this way is a really good way to reach.
I think part of what we're doing here, in a way, is sort of saying something in one voice, is that we really need funded research in this area. I mean, I'll just be blunt about it. Here, these restricted interests, we came up with the name affinities, the Suskinds. We were frustrated with restrictive interests. We thought that was a pejorative, it had valuation built into it. I said, no, affinity, I'm a word guy, my Pulitzer's in feature writing, in fact. Affinity, this speaks inclination, it speaks choice, growing expertise, identity. And we said, let's call it, and the word is now used everywhere. And I think that's a kind of progress. But where we're hopeful now is that the scientific community will catch up to say, here is one of the core 2 or 3 characteristics of autism. How is it we don't have empirically sound, peer-reviewed study on the neural mechanisms underneath them, or how to create therapeutic models that harness them? It's astonishing to me, as someone who reports on presidents and fault line issues of race and class, those big issues. I'm saying, how is this possible? In that this could really provide one of the few areas of strength-based therapeutic intervention supported by neuroscience, bringing together those usually Hatfield-McCoy opposite teams of therapists and researchers and neuroscientists in a kind of next wave of something that will work, frankly, for autism, because nothing works very well right now.
Sure. And I think it's the most interesting aspect of that is the notion of taking a look at restricted interests, but saying, let's look at this from the point of view of affinities, and then it becomes a lever to affect change, which immediately becomes a way to start experimentally partitioning the mechanisms of what's going on. So you can use the interventions that you develop as long as they're well controlled and they're manipulate one thing at a time. And then you look at, for example, the brain imaging and say, okay, can we modify the reward system with the piece of the intervention that we're using? And then what component of the intervention modifies, other components that are attached to the reward system that are making use of that learning mechanism to learn a higher order language, to use this as a metaphor for understanding the social world. And how do you, and in so doing, it's also a very cool basic cognitive neuroscience question of how does the brain use a movie or an inanimate object or a map to represent the social world, because so often we kind of think it works the other way around.
Right.
You use the social world to
We can have
understand.
some requests for people to speak up a little bit.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I also wanted to just take this opportunity because I feel like we're getting there where maybe we could see sidekicks in action.
Okay.
Where we can sort of see an example of what you're saying, where, a therapy, and what you're saying as well, an intervention where someone is using a child's affinity in order to speak to them through a phone. And then
it's only a 4-minute video, so we'll be still plenty of time. We'll still have 20 minutes for questions. So this is interesting. Let me set it up a little bit here.
Okay.
I'm going to stop it. But this is a usability test we did back about 1.5 years ago with a prototype of the model. This is one, here's how it works. This is computer to phone, but when a parent types or talks into their computer, it comes to in real time in the voice of a character on the child's phone. The child can talk to the character, it doesn't have to type or anything, and the parent can hear them. So what's happening is you're carrying on a mediated conversation through an avatar, through this character that the child chooses. They feel comfortable with it. And they feel very comfortable talking to it, more than to a human, actually, which is something that's been shown again and again in studies. You know, they don't get the sensory overwhelm. They don't get the parent anxiety either. So in each of these instances, we knew the kid's affinity ahead of time. We loaded up lots of clips with sides, suggestions of what the parent might say. But in this case, the parents did it on their own. And you'll see the results. It's quite interesting.
Afraid or ashamed of being different from other people?
Sometimes.
Maybe we can watch a clip to understand how you feel.
Sure thing.
You belong down in the area.
So do you. No, Anna, I belong here. Alone. Where I can be who I am without hurting anybody.
Have you ever been afraid and wanted to be alone?
Sometimes.
Why?
Because I have low self-esteem and autism.
Doing this, taking on this other persona in order for her to have a conversation, I could more anonymously talk to her, have her explain her thoughts without it being mom.
Right.
Which,
you know, some of the kids knew a parent was behind the curtain, some didn't. It didn't seem to matter. Eventually, pretty much all the kids found out. You know, what we find is a little bit of, you mentioned Vygotsky before, about inner speech, and, you know, and how, in a way, we're tapping that, entering that place, because this speech is safe speech. It's almost like they're talking to themselves. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it allows for a therapist or a parent or a clinician to enter into the world of the affinity and essentially help find your way to help them help themselves. We do it with Owen. Now, our son is 26 now. You know, we've been on movie tour this last year. He gets his own hotel room. And so we talk through the character. He's on one phone in his room, we're on ours. And we even hear things that we would not otherwise hear. He knows it's us behind the curtain, doesn't matter. And recently we did it, and Owen talked about being down in the dumps. He had broken up with his girlfriend. He said, what do you do when you're down? We type it, it comes through the voice of the character Griff, which he loves. He's like, I don't know what to do sometimes. I just don't know how to pick myself up. We're hearing a voice that we don't otherwise hear. And it allows us to be better parents, like it allows therapists to be better, to be clear. I mean, we're flying blind in so many cases because we can't get in. And this is a way in. So that's what we built. You know, interestingly, these are curated content from Disney, Harry Potter, Star Wars. And from this usability, the kids not only opened up like that young lady did, but also had a heightened level of pragmatic, expressive, and receptive speech than the parents had seen. So then we went out to build the big model, and we found that the content relationships are complicated because, of course, they're owned by big companies, and that's an issue. So we ended up doing two things. One, we actually surveyed affinities for the first time, a survey that'll be out in the fall with the help of Autism Speaks. And we found the variety of affinities is stunning. Much less concentrated in movies and videos than we thought.
Right.
And the fact is that the desire of the child to find what they love is in a way a telegraphing of what they're using. So we built a system now which is YouTube enabled. So when the child searches, is this great? When the child searches YouTube, it's mirrored, whatever they find is mirrored on the screen of the other phone. It's a screen sharing. So you can find out exactly what they're using, and then through the character, you can engage with them. Mm-hmm. Stop the video, start it, discuss it, and then that's the way you get eyes in a way, keys to the inner world where they're processing all the time, using affinities. And that's the way we sort of rebuilt it based on research. And it's, and we have it up on the App Store now. It's free, obviously, but people are trying it, therapists and others, and shaping it to usage. Because, in a way, they know best how that kid is using the thing they love as pathway.
That's really exciting.
Isn't it neat?
Yeah, it reminds me of my son's, my 11-year-old son, is now allowed to kind of check out YouTube. He wants his own YouTube channel, and and the agreement is that I have to have access and it can't delete history. So I'll check the history, and he at first I was checking for key phrases to make sure he wasn't searching for inappropriate things, and that wasn't really happening, except the one time when he and his younger brother misspelled naked. But still, so then I realized it's actually also an incredible tool to see what your kids are interested in.
Yeah.
And then I'm embarrassed to admit this, but how interested I was if I started clicking on some of the things and watching them. It turns out genetics kind of works. And my inner 11-year-old came out really fast. And soon I was sending him suggestions. Like, watch this. So look at this guy.
How did he respond to that? He probably liked it.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah, I'm
Like,
not sure. What's that doing in
what
here?
to suggest it. But it's a great tool as a parent to kind of figure out what they like and meet them at that level.
Yeah.
And really, if you can almost covertly use it and surprise them with, well, it's sort of metaphor of the situation you're facing. It's kind of like this thing I was watching on YouTube. It's like this, and they're kind of, oh yeah, you get me.
Yeah, right.
I get it. So it's really nice, even beyond autism.
Well, we're getting a lot of general educators coming to Sidekicks, downloading it.
Right.
Because they're saying, I can use this in the classroom.
Mhm.
This is wonderful. Again, it gives them a way in.
Right.
And the beauty of the avatar is because it's both intimate and anonymous in a way.
Yeah.
So you get under the radar through the minefield that most kids have.
Mhm.
And just the fact that you're not there, you're behind the curtain.
Right.
It frees them. I mean, the other thing, of course, is that in 1995, when we're trying to do this with we had to sit in the basement for 10 years watching Disney. Now you've got it instantly, 1,000 feet deep on any area of interest.
Right.
And the kids, of course, all kids are self-nourishing so young. That's why they're bored in school. They're like, I've already done this.
Mhm.
And it allows you into that place in which the richest things are happening.
Right. You could imagine a kind of sort of deep learning where you're kind of figuring out the patterns of what they're searching. You're predicting where they're going to be, what they're going to be interested
Well,
in.
you love this. You're going to love it. So we have a lot
sort
of
of planting content.
Well, we have a bunch
shape
of,
their
we have a
views.
lot of AI and machine learning people working with us. And, when the inventor of Siri was our first sort of tech guru. And so we're able to crowdsource and do machine learning to bring heightened interpretive offerings and also build a bond that the child is building with the avatar, which is in a way building a bond with a deeper place within themselves, really.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, and kind of come to a natural point as to we've heard so much about the promise, and yet why hasn't there been more research into special interests to date? They're still not very well understood. And also, why has there not been more research into what happens in someone's brain when they are tapping into these special interests, and whether or not that leads to compensatory mechanisms, other kinds of learning? And, why is that just not there?
So I think there's been a little bit, but very little, I think.
I think the little bit is with you at this point. You're going to your little pilot you're doing, right? And
Worries doing something.
Yeah, so I think partly, as Ryan said, often these restricted interests, to call it the other way, were viewed as a problem, not a solution, not a help, not a pathway, not a bridge. And so partly, I think, for that reason, there wasn't that much focus on them. And I think the other piece of the story is, again, our research tends to average across people. The average person with this does, this way. The average left-hander, right-hander person with autism, without autism, and that exactly misses, I think, the boat on when interests are very focused, because you have to really individualize the experiment, and we tend not to do that because, on average, researchers like very well-controlled stimuli, cloned mice when possible. So the idea that you would take this deep look into a person and say, like, this really matters to you, this has not been a traditional way of doing experiments. And so I think until we saw the potential powerful help that could be provided by this approach that Ron has really illuminated so beautifully, the science then is motivated to go in that direction. And the other thing that's very frustrating, I have to say, there's always a tension. If you're a parent or a caretaker or somebody with autism, you want quick action, you want the app now. If I were a parent, I would want that too. And science tends to move pretty slowly. Well done science follows behind in many ways the experience of individual parents and caretakers. And so, so it's a slow process, but Ron has really gotten us that's why Kevin and I are here, really, is because he's inspired us to be very interested in this. Is an important question.
One of the things interesting is that what we have found in the last several years is that affinity is really the one lingua franca, the one common thread across the many varieties of phenotype inside of autism. So 90+% of folks on the spectrum claim an affinity, one or several that are the intense interests. That's one thing. Secondly, what John said at one point, which I thought was interesting, is that we may find, certainly what I find with the dinosaur girl, is that they tend to use these affinities in similar ways despite that variety of every kid being different. And that's the hope, is that we'll find neural correlates, neural substrates, neural architecture that will form a map of how affinities are processed within the neural anatomy. That would be exciting. And another thing I mentioned at one point is that it could also lead us to a kind of personalized medicine idea, which of course is hot everywhere in the last couple of years, is that a trained kid may be different than a Disney kid in certain ways. And so we can tailor therapies around those particular neurological distinctions. So that's all what's hopeful.
And there's one I think important caveat to the excitement. And it goes back to something John said earlier. You can imagine collecting, and it can be because you have an affinity, and you're fascinated by it, and you're joyfully awaiting the next element of the set. Or you're terrified that if you don't get, that particular stamp, you're going to die. And you truly feel like you're going to die.
Yeah.
And those are two, we're only beginning to understand how those differ, other than kind of verbally being able to describe it. And I don't want people to look at their family member with autism and see some behaviors and some interests that are very maladaptive, that are destructive, that they're hurting themselves, they're banging their head against the wall, they're walking in circles, that are repetitive and restrictive, and think that's what we're calling affinities.
Yeah.
It is this other element of the intense interest plus using it to kind of decipher meaning in the world, as opposed to doing it kind of out of fear. And I think that distinction you made is the best way for a parent to kind of ask themselves, is my child asking for this next version of this plush doll in the set, the third green one that she has, because of fear, or because she's trying to figure something out that happened in class and this is going to help her? I found myself asking myself that question at times, and I wish I had that tool you just gave the audience, ask yourself, is this more of a fear mediated, or is this helping to decipher the world? And sometimes the deciphering of the world could be the thing you're afraid of. You're afraid of the world, and you're trying to figure out the world. The world's terrifying at times. But I think the audience will be able to see that distinction, and not think that everything that's repetitive or intense or restricted is really some subtle form of communication if only we could understand.
Yeah.
And I just worry where that will lead if we give that impression and don't give that caveat.
Absolutely, yeah. Beautifully stated. One of the things I would say generally about parents is they're sort of like, as Cornelia said at one point, if I have to watch Dumbo one more time, I'm going to run away with the circus. They're like, please, no, not Thomas the Tank, anything, because the child is there, and the parents, first off, think this is what's keeping him from doing things that are age appropriate.
Right.
This is cutting off from social engagement. And oh my God, I can't, please no. And what I would say to them, I said, well, wait, World in a Grain of Sand, or what Joseph Campbell would say, is it's all in there if you know how to look. And once they get that, I find a turn, but it's hard for many of them because they come at it as neurotypicals generally from the other direction.
Sure.
No more Harry Potter, please. So that's part of this learning that's going on.
We've had quite a few questions over the course of the presentation as well. I've asked a couple that have come up in emails beforehand. So one question is about someone's son who has an affinity for Lego airplanes, but he seems to be losing his affinity, and how special interest can change over time. And is this reflective of reward responses changing over time? And is that something that you also need to be aware of when you're thinking about, taking this idea forward?
Well, can I just say that some studies show that people do change affinities. They often have several. They change on various rotations, not all the same, but they find new ones, and there's sometimes proximal affinities that are similar that they go to, kind of like leaping on a lily pad next door. So the child becoming disinterested or not as interested in Lego just means probably that something new is coming.
Another person asked, and I know that you mentioned this earlier, but just while we're on the subject, when are you planning to publish the results of the affinity study?
It'll be in the fall.
Okay.
In the fall, and it's quite something. It'll create news, and it's unprecedented. It's the first time it's been done.
Okay. Do you see any actual funded neuroscience studies of affinities in children and youth with autism in the near future?
Yes, in fact, thanks to Ron's help and Kevin's help, the two of us are embarking. We're in the very initial stages. It takes a little while to set this up, to recruit families to participate and so on, but we are engaged in that process, and we're starting.
Is there information that we could give people after this webinar if they were interested in learning more that I can share?
Yes, just to not disappoint anybody, I should say.
Yep.
The study is being conducted in Boston because we need to get them into a machine to look at their brains. So we're not as broad geographically at the moment as we'd love to be, but certainly anybody in the Boston area or who's we would be happy to be in communication with.
And there's a companion study happening at the Lurie Center, Mass General's big autism center up here in Lexington, and also in Boston, where they're using sidekicks and bringing in affinity modalities to bear to check efficacy.
How are you applying the avatar in the sidekicks app if the person's affinity is not something that can be anthropomorphized very easily?
Okay, so good question. So we have some very skilled animators working with us, and they've come up with a brilliant idea that they can take a piece of clip art, a train, an air conditioner, a ski lift, and affix a face on it. The face moves with various emotions. So a child can create an avatar that reflects an inanimate object as their affinity, along with the more traditional ones. There's a lot of avatars. We have great animators helping us with that. So that's an answer to that.
There's just a thought I'll connect you with this group later. There's a studio in
Extraordinary Minds?
Yes.
Yeah. Ed Asner's involved.
Yes.
Yeah.
amazing kind of teaching individuals with autism, how to animate. It'd be great to get them animating for you.
Well, we will. And what's really another cool thing that we're doing is we're calling, and I'm calling them now, we're calling upon young adults or folks in their late teens who have various affinities to join us here at the Affinity Project here at Harvard Square to say, hey, I'm a Thomas the Tank, I'm a SpongeBob expert. Great. So there's a SpongeBob kid at this center, and you, SpongeBob expert who's 22 or whatever, 19, you are going to tee up the scenes that you've used the most for various points of emotional social valence or goals, and you will feed that to the therapist through the avatar, through the sidekick phone, that she or he can bring to bear on the child. So they can be instantly expert, as frankly only ASD people are, in this deep and wide way. So we're calling organizations saying, we want those autistic spectrum young adults who have super strong and powerful affinities to contact us, because we'll pay them and stuff, and which they deserve. It's a very evolved skill, and they will help therapy be that much more effective. That's the thing we're doing. So.
Okay. Another question we have is, in therapy with adolescents and young adults with autism, I often try to help them using their affinities to meet others with similar interests, which if one of their goals is to make more friends. Some of these interests, however, could make them targets for further bullying at school. How can clinicians, teachers, and parents balance encouraging affinities while also protecting children and adolescents from bullying?
You want to handle that one?
Yeah, I mean, and kind of seeing.
To speak up.
Yeah, sure. And I think I know the person asking this question.
Oh gosh, a ringer.
No, I think she's recently, she graduated from my lab and is about to graduate with her PhD, so in clinical psychology. But I think, so she knows more about this than I do. But I think that it's a tough thing, right? I mean, it's kind of every parent's worst nightmare. So I'm going to answer it from the parent point of view. I can't tell you how many Imagination Movers concerts I've been to. And for Frances, she's a little too old to be going to those. And I'm certainly too old to be going to those. I'm starting to feel like a groupie to this band. And, it's tough because I worry that while I'm helping her have this interest, and it's something we do together, and I relish those times together, it's when she goes to school and talks about it, it's going to get her into trouble with the other students. She has this insight that she can't, so she doesn't, which is kind of extraordinary. Okay, you don't, but she'll actually ask me to pretend I'm one of her friends via text and talk to me about it.
Wow.
And I'll do that, and that way she kind of gets it out of her system. But she knows I'm not that person I'm pretending to be. So if I go out of character, she'll correct me and tell me what I should have said. And, it's just really tough. Her school, it's great for her in the sense of it wouldn't happen even if she started talking about Imagination Movers in the middle of class. But the school I went to in high school, it would have been an immediate fight. School has changed for my demographic in the towns that I can afford to live in, but for other people out there, it hasn't.
Yeah.
So it's just tough. So I have no real answer other than empathy, and it's going to vary so much from school to school. But trying to use that as a teachable moment and say, there are things that we could talk about with this group of people and this group of people and this group of people. But otherwise, you've got to kind of tailor your message to the audience. And obviously that's only going to work with individuals who have that verbal ability to kind of talk through those things. So,
well, I'll just say that those are issues with Ellen and Disney, of course. One of the things that I think is a little different from when we were kids is that things like Disney and others are kind of a common currency now, unless when we weren't little, they're not quite as age designated. That's helpful. Often he would find social bonds with kids because he knows so much about Disney. Even when they're 16, they still love the movies. They may not admit it, but they do to him.
Yeah.
The other thing is that that he found others who were his kindred.
Right.
That was crucial because he started a Disney club when he got to his school, and it became his life. He has one now where he lives, and you know, it's the place of greatest comfort and social bonding. So he's not alone. And they all say, you know, Disney is for everyone, not just for kids. They get a little more pickup on that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, part of what they have to learn is perspective taking if they can manage it. And sometimes they get a tough response.
One question we have, which I think is just important to clear up, whether or not you can type or use AAC with the Sidekicks app rather than use it as a verbal.
Yes. So in about good question. In about 2 weeks, we will have the sort of fully realized version up. There's kind of a prototype in the App Store. So in 2 weeks, we'll have one that you can type or talk, and it's symmetrical, so that either way, you have an avatar that's on someone else's phone, and they have one on your phone, and you share the video. So you've got a very, very strong bond. So for kids who don't speak, they can type, and those who can go either way. They have a choice.
One final question, are there any good books on this subject or related subjects?
Other
than life
I think I'm in a library of one on this one.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, Temple talks about taking in pictures. She said to me at one point, we were at dinner, she's like, I used Disney as a kid too. The difference is she had to go to the movie theater. She didn't have free feed to really dig in deep and do all that learning. You know, in some ways, I think what's powerful about this is that when people see this, they're like, this is right on the axis of same yet different, more yet less. Is that, of course, we all have affinities. We all have these passions. You know, they're constructed differently in most of us, but in a way, this is so very familiar. How they use it, well, they rely on it and draw from it much more than we would. But in a way, this is something that people see with familiar eyes, which I think is part of what makes it so exciting. Parents can participate in this. Any sentient parent says, okay, I'm getting in there. Now you can. Obviously, that's what we did with Sidekicks to allow you to. But, you know, in a way, it's freeing yourself from some of the supposed tos. But you're supposed to love, like you going to the concert with Francis and saying, you know, I'm going to live in the place of joy. That's what Cornelia says all. She says, so much of this is about joy. Find a place of joy. And the brain actually works differently when joy hits. It's better. When you're feeling better, you are better neurologically. Things occur. And all our effective neuroscientists, some of them are on our advisory board, say, yes, that's part of what we have learned too.
Okay, I'm afraid that's really all that we have time for. Thank you so much for such an engaging and I think in many ways practical discussion for our audience to go away and think about and lots of ideas to take forward in the future. If anyone has a question that they would like to pose to the panelists, they can. You just need to email me. My address is in the Zoom meeting invitation and registration that you got. I will forward all questions on to our panelists. And just to finish up, please know that there is going to be a complete replay of this webinar available on the Spectrum News site in a couple of days. This webinar is part of an ongoing series, so please check our site for upcoming talks. The next one will be in September with Connie Kasari. And there's also video archives of previous webinars. Thanks again, Kevin, John, and Ron, and thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.